She stood there, staring at the muddy ground beneath her boots, breathless, heart racing. The cold wind bit at her skin, but it wasn't the weather that sent a chill down her spine. It was the choice she had just made. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Not her family, not her friends, no one. It all started with a single decision, a single act of bravery that changed everything. It was supposed to be just another day at the barn, just another ride on her beloved horse, but the moment her eyes locked onto him, his soft, trusting eyes, she knew her life was about to be different. She had always dreamed of this day. Her whole life had been leading up to it. She'd saved every penny, worked every odd job, and put in countless hours of training. But in that moment, when she looked at her horse, she realized something far deeper than just the bond of owner and pet. Her horse needed her more than ever. A sudden illness had taken him from peak health to a fragile state. The diagnosis was grim: he wouldn't survive much longer if something wasn't done. The options were slim, the costs astronomical, and no one in her family had the means to pay for what was needed. But she couldn't just let him go. He had been there through every major moment of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, her loneliness. And now he needed her. Without hesitation, she made her choice, not knowing the full weight of the decision she was about to carry. This wasn't just about her horse anymore. This was a test of everything she believed in. Her family, her future, her entire world would come crashing down because of it. But she didn't care. She had made a promise to him. And now, she would keep it. The price of the treatment was steep, far beyond what she could afford, beyond what anyone could afford. But she had a plan, one that no one could have seen coming. What she didn't realize was that this plan would lead her down a path she wasn't prepared to walk. A path that would take her from the quiet comforts of a small town to the high-stakes world of sacrifice, betrayal, and unimaginable truth. The world would soon learn that no sacrifice, no matter how great, was without its cost. And as she stood there, heart pounding, she realized that no one, least of all herself, could have anticipated the shocking truth that was about to unfold. She had always known that horses were expensive. Growing up in a modest household, she had learned from a young age the importance of hard work and the value of money. But owning a horse, especially one as beautiful and spirited as hers, was something she had only ever dreamed of. Her family had never been wealthy, and her father worked long hours as a mechanic while her mother tended to the household. They provided for her, yes, but luxuries were a rare thing. When she first got her horse, it had been nothing short of a miracle. She had begged, pleaded, and worked every odd job she could find to save enough money to buy him. And when she finally did, she could hardly believe her luck. They'd spent years together, developing a bond that was deeper than any friendship she had ever known. The horse wasn't just an animal to her, he was her companion, her confidant, and the one constant in her life. He had been there through the highs and lows, through her successes and failures, never once leaving her side. But now, he needed her, and she was determined to return the favor. When the vet delivered the grim news about his condition, she had felt like her heart had shattered. The horse was sick, terribly sick, and his time was running out. She had always known that owning a horse came with risks, but she hadn't prepared herself for this. The doctor told her the treatment would cost more than her family could afford. The price tag was more than a year's worth of their combined income. There were other options, yes, but they weren't good ones. Without the treatment, her horse would deteriorate rapidly, and he'd be gone in just a matter of months. Her family was devastated. They didn't understand why she was so fixated on saving him. They worried about the impact it would have on their finances, on her future. Her mother cried and begged her to let it go. "You can't keep throwing money at something that's beyond saving," she had said, her voice cracking with emotion. But she couldn't stop. Her horse was more than just a pet. He had been with her through everything, her first heartbreak, her moments of doubt, the times when she felt utterly alone. She couldn't just let him suffer without doing everything in her power to help him. The thought of losing him, of letting him die, tore her apart inside. That was when she decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew she couldn't afford the treatment. But there had to be another way. She had heard rumors about a rich businessman who lived in a nearby town, a man who was known for his wealth and his affinity for horses. If anyone could help her, it was him. She didn't waste any time. She did her research, found his contact information, and wrote him a letter. In it, she poured out her heart, explaining the bond she shared with her horse, the dire situation they were in, and the financial hardship that kept her from affording the treatment. She didn't know if he would read the letter, let alone respond. But she had to try. For her horse. Days passed, and she tried to move on with her life, though every moment was filled with worry and uncertainty. The thought of losing him gnawed at her every second. Then, one evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, writing in her journal, she received a call. It was from a private number. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. The voice on the other end was smooth, calculated, but kind. The man identified himself as the businessman she had written to. He had read her letter, and something about her story had resonated with him. He offered her a deal. He had the resources to provide the treatment her horse needed, but in exchange, he required something from her in return. He wanted her to work for him, to take on a job at his estate for as long as the treatment lasted. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only option she had left. Her heart pounded as she listened to him. She knew she couldn't afford to turn down the opportunity, but the idea of working for this stranger, of stepping into a world so foreign to her, was overwhelming. Still, there was no choice. This was her chance to save her horse, and she was willing to do whatever it took. She agreed. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her decision settled in. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for sure: everything was about to change. The world she had known, the simple life with her horse, would never be the same again. The businessman's offer was a lifeline, but it came at a cost. And she wasn't sure yet if she was ready for what it would mean. The next few days were a blur of mixed emotions. She went to bed each night feeling a knot in her stomach, unsure whether she had made the right decision. On one hand, she was relieved: she had found someone who could save her horse, someone who had the resources to make everything right again. On the other hand, the offer to work for this mysterious businessman felt like stepping into a different world, one where she didn't belong. When she arrived at the estate for the first time, she felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. The sprawling property was far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The mansion stood proudly against the backdrop of towering trees, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful, opulent, and intimidating all at once. She had always been used to the simplicity of her family's modest home, and now, here she was, surrounded by wealth and luxury. The businessman had made it clear that her role was not to be a servant, but to assist with the care of his horses and the upkeep of the estate. She was told she would be provided with room and board, and her salary would be used to pay off the cost of the treatment for her horse. It seemed simple enough, but something in his voice had told her there was more. Would involve. And though he had promised her that everything would work out, she was beginning to feel like there was something he wasn't telling her. The more time she spent in his world, the more it seemed like the stakes were much higher than she had originally realized. In the stillness of the night, she wondered if she had made a mistake. But as she turned to walk back to the mansion, she reminded herself that there was no going back now. She had made a choice, and that choice was the only thing keeping her and her horse from losing everything. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the truth about what was really happening here remained elusive. But one thing was clear: she would stop at nothing to save her horse, no matter what it cost her. The days began to blur together, each one resembling the last. Her routine had become familiar: wake up early, tend to the horses, clean the stables, and prepare for the next day's work. Yet, the unease she felt about the businessman and his mysterious estate only deepened. Something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The more time she spent here, the more isolated she felt. The estate's grandeur felt suffocating, and the workers, though friendly, kept their distance. They whispered amongst themselves when they thought she wasn't listening, exchanging knowing glances and hushed tones when she walked by. She began to question the very nature of the deal she had made. What was the businessman's real interest in her and her horse? He'd promised to help with the treatment, but why? And why had he been so quick to offer her a job in exchange? It felt too convenient, too calculated, and for the first time, she found herself wondering if this was a mistake she couldn't undo. The tipping point came when she overheard a conversation late one evening while walking back from the stables. She had just finished her work for the day and was making her way back to the guest quarters when she noticed the lights in the mansion's grand hallway flickering. Curious, she moved closer, hoping to hear some of the conversation that was taking place just around the corner. "You know we can't keep her here forever," a voice said, one she immediately recognized as belonging to the businessman. "I don't like it either," another voice replied, low and hushed. "But she's doing the work. She's helping with the horses, and if the horses' condition improves, it will have all been worth it. We just need her to stay a little longer." The first voice, his, spoke again, though this time, there was an edge to his words. "It's not just about the horse anymore. We need her for something bigger. The treatment, she doesn't realize it, but it's just a small part of the bigger picture." The words struck her like a blow to the chest. She froze in her tracks, too stunned to move. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. They were talking about her, about using her. It wasn't just about saving her horse. It was about something far darker, something far more complicated. But what? She couldn't hear the rest of the conversation. As quietly as she could, she backed away from the door and retreated to her room. Her mind raced, processing everything she had just overheard. What did the businessman mean by something bigger? And how was she involved in it? She hadn't signed up for anything more than saving her horse. This, whatever it was, wasn't part of the plan. The next few days felt like a blur. Her work at the estate continued as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had overheard. It gnawed at her every waking moment. She had to get answers. But how? Every time she tried to approach the businessman, he was either too busy or too elusive. He never seemed to be around when she needed him most. And when he was, he would give her vague answers that only made her more suspicious. One evening, after finishing her chores, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed to know the truth, no matter the cost. The truth about her horse's treatment, the truth about the businessman's intentions, and, most of all, the truth about the deal she had made. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. Under the cover of darkness, she snuck into the mansion. Her heart raced with every step as she moved through the grand hallways, the large estate eerily silent around her. She knew the businessman's office was located in the East Wing, and that was where she was headed. She was determined to find something, anything, that would explain what was really going on. When she reached the door to the office, she paused for a moment, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was inside. The house was still, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that she was alone. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped inside. The office was large and imposing, with heavy wooden furniture and shelves filled with books, but it wasn't the decor that caught her attention. It was the desk. She had to know what was in those drawers. Her pulse quickened as she approached the desk, her hands trembling. She could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make. She had no idea what she was looking for, but something inside her told her it was here, hidden in plain sight. Her fingers moved quickly, opening the top drawer. Papers. She sifted through them, contracts, financial statements, and documents that made little sense to her. Then, something caught her eye. A letter. It wasn't long, but it was enough to send her heart into a frenzy. It was a letter from a veterinarian, detailing her horse's medical condition, specifically, a rare and expensive treatment he had been recommended to receive. But that wasn't what shocked her. What shocked her was the name at the bottom of the letter. The name of the businessman's company. The same company that owned the estate. The same company that had offered to help her. But the letter wasn't just about the treatment, it was about something far more sinister. Her stomach dropped as she read further, realizing that the businessman wasn't just helping her. He was using her and her horse as part of an experiment, one that had far-reaching implications. The room spun as she reread the letter over and over again. Her hand trembled as she gripped the edges of the paper. She couldn't make sense of it at first, and then, like a punch to the gut, the truth became clear. The treatment wasn't just a medical procedure for her horse. It was part of something far darker, a manipulation that she never could have imagined. Her horse was just a pawn in a game, no, not just her horse, but herself as well. She had been deceived. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she had just uncovered. She had trusted the businessman, believed that his offer to help had been genuine. But now, she realized it was all a lie. The treatments for the horses were not just about care or well-being, they were tied to experiments. The letter described how various animals, including horses, were being used in trials funded by the businessman's company, with no regard for the ethics or consequences. The treatment wasn't designed to save her horse, it was part of a larger project, something sinister that involved testing and manipulation. She had been lured into his world under false pretenses. She stumbled backward from the desk, the letter slipping from her grasp as the weight of what she had learned crushed her. Her first instinct was to leave, to pack up and run as far as possible from this place, from the lies and deceit that had led her here. But she knew it wasn't that simple. The letter wasn't just about her horse, it was about her, too. She had unknowingly agreed to be part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The idea that she had been used, it was unbearable. She quickly gathered her composure, knowing she couldn't afford to panic. There had to be a way out of this, but she couldn't figure it out yet. One thing was certain, she needed to confront the businessman. She needed to hear the truth from him, straight from his mouth. There was no other choice. But as she stood there, breathing heavily in the dim light of the office, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart froze in her chest. She quickly shoved the letter into the back pocket of her jeans and rushed to the door, praying she hadn't been caught. She needed to leave before she was discovered. The door creaked open as she hurriedly slipped out of the office, making her way down the darkened hall. The mansion felt colder now, more foreboding. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, and her pulse quickened. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. As she neared the staircase, she turned the corner and froze. The businessman stood at the end of the hall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had been waiting for her. "I see you found what you were looking for," he said calmly, his voice smooth as always, but there was an edge to it now. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no denying it anymore. He knew she had uncovered the truth. "How long?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "How long have you been using me?" "Using my horse?" The businessman didn't answer right away. He took a step forward, his eyes locking with hers. "You knew from the beginning that I could help you, didn't you?" he said softly. "You knew the treatment would save your horse. What you didn't know was that the treatment was part of something much bigger. Something that was always going to happen, regardless of what you thought." Her stomach twisted in anger and confusion. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Why? Why would you do this? Why would you deceive me like this? I trusted you. He shrugged slightly, his expression almost cold. You weren't the first to fall for it. You won't be the last. This isn't about you, or your horse. It's about the bigger picture. The work we're doing here, it's about progress. The sacrifices, the testing, it's all part of something that will change the world. His words felt like ice in her veins. You're insane, she whispered, unable to comprehend how anyone could justify what he was doing. You're using animals for your own gain, and you don't even care. He stared at her, as though he was weighing her words. You think you know what's best for your horse, for everyone involved. But sometimes, bigger forces are at play. You'll understand when you see the results of the work we're doing here. She took a step back, her breath shallow. I can't be part of this. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to save my horse. The businessman's lips curled into a faint smile. You've already made your choice. You've committed. There's no going back now. Her heart pounded. He was right. She had committed by coming here, by agreeing to his terms. But she had never signed up for this kind of cruelty, for these experiments, for the lies. It felt like she was drowning in a sea of betrayal. But then something inside her shifted. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. She wasn't going to let this man control her fate, or the fate of her horse. She had made a promise, and she would see it through, no matter what it took. I won't be part of this, she said, her voice firm now, stronger than it had been moments before. I'll expose you. I'll tell the world what you've been doing. The businessman's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker in his eyes. You think you can stop this? You think you can leave and take your horse with you? It's too late for that. But she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to be a pawn any longer. She was going to fight. The businessman's expression darkened, but he didn't move. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a tense silence. His eyes bore into hers, as though calculating how much he could let her say before he had to stop her. Her heart raced, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her into silence. Not now, not after everything that had happened. You're making a mistake, he finally said, his voice low but firm. You don't understand the full picture. You think you're protecting your horse, but the truth is, you've been part of this all along. You just didn't know it. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine at his words. What do you mean? I've done everything you've asked of me. All I wanted was to save him. I wanted to give him the treatment he deserved, but you've been using me, using him, as part of your twisted experiment. His lips curled into a thin smile. You don't see it, do you? You've been helping me the whole time, and you didn't even realize it. The research you're so upset about, it's what will allow us to move forward with a new kind of medical treatment, a breakthrough in equine health. What you've been doing for your horse, working with me, is part of a bigger plan to change the world. You've been an essential part of this project from the start, even if you don't fully grasp it yet. Her mind whirled as she struggled to make sense of his words. Her horse wasn't just a patient to him, he was a key piece in his research, part of something she had never imagined. The businessman's explanation only made her more confused and angry. She had trusted him, had put her faith in his promises, believing that his only intention was to save her horse. But now, it seemed she had been walking into a nightmare. A nightmare far bigger than she had realized. No, she shook her head, the shock of his words settling into her chest like a lead weight. I never signed up for this. You took advantage of me. Of my desperation. I thought you cared about helping animals, not using them as experiments for some project. He took a step toward her, his face softening for the first time since their conversation began. I do care, he said, his voice taking on an almost sympathetic tone. I've dedicated my life to research, to finding solutions that could save thousands of animals. You don't understand the bigger picture, but you will. What we're doing here will change the future of veterinary medicine. It's about progress, about helping more than just your horse. And if you walk away now, you're walking away from that possibility. Her heart clenched at his words. She had heard them before, promises of progress, of saving lives, of changing the world. But the price of that progress was too high. She couldn't stand by while animals, including her horse, were treated as mere tools for someone's vision of progress. It wasn't right. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I won't be part of this anymore, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I'll make sure the world knows the truth about what you're doing here. The businessman's eyes narrowed, the warmth in his gaze replaced by a cold, calculating look. You think you can stop it? You think you can expose me? You have no idea how much power I have. You're nothing more than a small part of a much larger machine. Walk away if you want, but you'll be doing it alone. His words were harsh, but they only fueled her determination. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. She wasn't going to back down. I don't care, she said, her voice steady now, despite the rising fear in her chest. I'll find a way to bring you down. You can't keep hiding the truth. The businessman's lips twitched into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. I admire your determination. It's a shame, really. If you'd just agreed to help me, you would have been part of something incredible. But now, I'll have to make sure you stay quiet. You're becoming a problem. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized the full weight of his threat. This wasn't just a matter of her leaving. He wasn't going to let her walk away so easily. She had crossed a line, and now, he would do whatever it took to silence her. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but now she realized just how deep the danger ran. She had to act fast. Her mind raced as she thought of her next steps. She couldn't confront him alone, not here, not in his world of power and influence. But there had to be someone she could trust. Someone who could help her expose the truth. She had to get out of here, find a way to make people see the real cost of his experiments. With a final glance at the businessman, she turned and walked away. She couldn't stay here any longer, not under his watchful eye. Every part of her screamed to run, to escape while she still could, but her mind was already set. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She had a fight ahead of her, one that would change everything. The businessman watched her go, his eyes following her every move, but he said nothing more. He knew she wouldn't give up easily. And for a moment, just a brief moment, he felt something close to respect for her. But that respect wasn't enough to keep him from getting what he wanted. The next few days felt like a blur. She could no longer focus on the work that had once occupied her every waking moment. Every task she carried out, every hour spent with the horses, felt like it was happening in a haze, as though she were moving through someone else's life. Her mind was consumed by the businessman's words, the realization that she had been lured into something far darker than she could have ever imagined. She couldn't stay here any longer. She couldn't allow herself to be a part of this twisted world. But what choice did she have? She had no allies here. The other workers, though polite, seemed too afraid to speak up. They whispered amongst themselves but avoided confronting the businessman directly. She was alone in this fight, and the weight of that loneliness pressed on her chest like a heavy stone. Every night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She had to find a way to leave, to expose the truth about the businessman and his experiments. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous it was. The businessman wasn't just a rich, powerful man, he was connected. His influence stretched far beyond the estate, and he had resources that could crush her if she made a wrong move. She couldn't let him win. But how could she fight against someone so powerful? How could she stop him without putting herself, and her horse, in more danger? Her thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when she received a message from the businessman. The letter was short and to the point: "Meet me in the study at 7 p.m. We need to talk." Her stomach churned as she read the note. It felt like a trap, and she knew it. But she had no choice. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to confront him one last time, make him understand that she wouldn't back down. That evening, she made her way to the study, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The air was thick with tension, and the silence felt suffocating. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage before she pushed it open. The businessman was sitting at his desk, his back to her. His office was dimly lit, the only light coming from the fireplace that crackled quietly in the corner. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she could feel his eyes on her, cold and calculating. "Sit down," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We need to talk." She stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to argue, to yell at him, but she knew that wouldn't get her anywhere. She took a seat in front of the desk, her hands clenched in her lap, as she waited for him to speak. "I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he began, finally turning around to face her. "And I know you're angry. But I want you to understand something. What we're doing here, it's bigger than you. Bigger than your horse. What we're doing will save countless lives. What you've been a part of is important, even if you can't see that now." Her chest tightened as she listened to him. His words were smooth, rehearsed, but they made her feel sick to her stomach. "You think I don't see what you're doing? You've been using animals as experiments, manipulating me to get what you want. I never asked for any of this." The businessman leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You're wrong. You've always known what this was about. You just didn't want to face it. Now you've made your decision, and I respect that. But you need to understand the consequences of walking away from this. You're not the only one involved, and if you go public with what you've learned, it won't just affect you. It'll affect everyone you care about." She stiffened, the threat in his words hitting her like a punch. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what he meant. She had no family nearby, no one she could go to for help. She was alone. Completely alone. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "You don't realize how far my reach is. I have the power to make sure you never work with horses again. I can ruin you, ruin anyone you care about. Don't think I won't. People like you, people who think they can expose me, they don't last long." She felt the weight of his words. It was clear now that he wouldn't let her go without a fight. But she wasn't going to back down. Not after everything she had learned. She wouldn't let him control her life anymore. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook. "I don't care what you do to me. I'll tell the world the truth. I'll make sure everyone knows what's happening here." He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was cold, dark, and filled with menace. "You think you can stop me? You think anyone will believe you over me? You're just a girl who showed up here looking for help. No one will take you seriously. No one will care." For a moment, she felt the weight of his words, the crushing realization that he might be right. But deep inside, she felt something shift. She wasn't just a girl. She was someone who had fought for what she loved, someone who had sacrificed everything to protect her horse. And if that meant exposing the truth, then she would do whatever it took. She wasn't going to let him win. "I don't care," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "I'll fight. I'll make sure you're stopped. I won't let you destroy any more lives, animal or human." The businessman stared at her for a long moment, as though weighing her words, before he finally stood up from his chair. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "But for now, "You can leave. You've made your choice." She didn't hesitate. She stood up, turned on her heel, and walked out of the study, her heart pounding. As the door clicked shut behind her, she realized that she was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter. And she wasn't going to stop until she had exposed the truth. The weight of the businessman's threats lingered over her like a dark cloud, but with each step she took away from the study, something inside her grew stronger. She had crossed a line now, and there was no going back. The businessman's power, his influence, and the fear he instilled in her only pushed her further into determination. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her into silence. She had seen the truth, and now, she had to act on it. That night, she couldn't sleep. The walls of the guest quarters felt oppressive, like they were closing in on her. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind, his cold words echoing in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just trying to scare her. He was trying to break her, to make her doubt her own resolve. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, something else began to take shape in her mind. She couldn't fight this battle on her own, not without risking everything. She needed allies, people who could help her expose the businessman for what he really was. She needed to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The next morning, as the sun rose over the estate, she made a decision. She wasn't going to confront the businessman alone anymore. She had to go public with what she knew. She had to make the world see the monster he was. But in order to do that, she needed help. There was only one person she could think of, the local animal rights activist who had always been outspoken about animal cruelty. The activist had a reputation for taking on powerful figures and exposing the truth, no matter the consequences. If anyone could help her, it was him. Her heart pounded as she walked to the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number she had memorized from months ago. The phone rang several times before it was picked up. "Hello?" a voice answered, crackling on the line. "Hi," she said, trying to steady her voice. "My name's... I have information. Information about a man. A businessman who's been running illegal experiments on horses. I have proof." There was a pause on the other end. "What kind of proof?" "Documents, recordings, everything. He's been using horses, testing them for his own personal gain, pretending to offer them medical treatments when it's all part of an experiment. And now he's threatening me to keep quiet. I need your help." The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. "I need to know everything," the activist finally said. "Where are you?" "I'm at the estate. He's powerful. But I can't let him get away with this." "I'll be there," the activist said. "Stay safe. I'll do everything I can to help." Her heart skipped a beat. There was hope now. She wasn't alone. Someone believed her, and with the activist's help, they could expose the businessman and stop the experiments.
The activist promised to meet her the following day, and she spent the rest of the day preparing. She gathered all the evidence she had, copies of the letters, the medical records, the photographs she had secretly taken over the past few days. She couldn't let the businessman know what she was planning. He was dangerous, and the more time she spent on the estate, the more she realized just how far his reach extended. The web of influence he had was vast, but she couldn't let fear keep her silent. The night was long, and the moment she had been dreading, confronting the businessman, was fast approaching. She was about to risk everything to expose him, and she wasn't sure what would happen next. Would the activist be able to help? Would the truth come to light, or would the businessman silence her before she could do anything? The following evening, as dusk fell over the mansion, the activist arrived at the gates of the estate, his face serious, but determined. He had brought an investigative journalist with him, someone who had worked on similar cases in the past. Together, they would document everything, the illegal treatments, the deception, the cruelty, and make sure that the world knew what had been happening behind closed doors. The girl led them to the stables, where they began to photograph the horses and record everything she had witnessed. The activist took the documents she had collected, flipping through them with a practiced eye. His face darkened as he read through the records. "This is worse than I thought," he murmured. "This isn't just a few horses. He's been running tests on dozens, maybe hundreds. We need to get this information to the right people, now." As they continued to gather evidence, the tension in the air grew thicker. Every sound felt amplified, each footstep, each creaking door, each hushed conversation between the activist and the journalist. The businessman was bound to find out what was happening. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous it became. And then, as they were preparing to leave, the unexpected happened. The girl turned to see the businessman standing at the entrance of the barn, his face twisted with fury. He had known. He had been watching. "Leave," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. "Now." The activist stepped forward, standing his ground. "We're not going anywhere. We have the evidence. We have everything we need to expose you." The businessman's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You think you can stop me? I'll destroy everything you've worked for. You'll regret this." The girl's heart pounded as she stood beside the activist, her body tense with fear. But she didn't back down. This was it, the moment of truth. The businessman's threats no longer had the same weight they once did. She had a team on her side. She had the evidence. And most importantly, she had the courage to fight for what was right. The activist turned to her, a reassuring smile on his face. "Don't worry. We've got this." As the standoff between the two men continued, the girl realized that there was no turning back. She had chosen to stand up for what she believed in, and with the help of the activist, she was going to make sure the world knew the truth. The businessman could try to intimidate them, but it was too late. The truth would come to light. And nothing would stop her now. The air inside the stable was thick with tension, the businessman's cold glare locking onto the girl and her allies. The activist and the journalist stood their ground, cameras still recording, documents in hand, ready to expose the truth. The businessman had lost control of the situation, and he knew it. His power, his influence, none of it mattered anymore. The truth was about to come out. The businessman's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "This isn't just about horses. It's about research, about progress. You think you're helping, but you're ruining something far bigger than yourself." The activist took a step forward. "What you call progress is exploitation. You've been using these animals for profit, for experiments, and lying to people who trusted you. That ends today." The businessman's face darkened, his hands clenching into fists. But even he could see it, his game was over. The journalist had already sent live updates to their network, exposing the story in real time. Photos, documents, and testimonies were spreading fast. People were learning the truth, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He turned to the girl, his voice colder than ever. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." But she didn't flinch. She wasn't the same scared girl who had arrived at the estate, desperate to save her horse. She had fought through fear, through doubt, and had stood up for what was right. She had faced him, faced his lies, and she had won. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I did what was right. And I'd do it again." The businessman exhaled sharply, shaking his head. He looked past her, at the activist, the journalist, and then at the camera that was still recording. He knew he had lost. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of his empire that was now crumbling around him. But the fight wasn't over just yet. Within hours, the authorities arrived at the estate, following the explosive media coverage. Investigators combed through the files, interviewing workers who had remained silent for too long. With the overwhelming evidence against him, the businessman had nowhere to hide. He was charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty, fraud, and illegal medical experimentation. His name, once respected in elite circles, became synonymous with corruption. The girl stood outside the estate, her horse by her side, watching as the authorities secured the property. She ran her fingers through his mane, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. He was safe now. She had fought for him, and she had won. The activist placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did something incredible today," he said. "You didn't just save your horse, you saved so many others. You stood up when no one else would." She nodded, exhaling deeply. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't know if I could do it. But I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let him get away with it." He smiled. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up even when you're terrified. And you did that." As she looked at her horse, she thought about everything they had been through. The desperation, the heartbreak, the betrayal, everything had led to this moment. She had learned that sometimes, doing the right thing meant standing alone, risking everything. But in the end, it was worth it. She had saved him. She had saved them all. As the sun set over the estate, she realized that this wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something new. She had found her strength, her voice. And now, she knew she would never be silent again. Life lesson: true strength isn't measured by how much power you have, but by what you're willing to fight for. Standing up for what is right will always be the hardest path, but it's the only one that leads to real change.